Welcome in, listener. You're listening to a segment from the Slumpbuster podcast with Ju-Ju and Dre. Find the full episode on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. Enjoy.
Anyway, we had a great show last week, and I think I'm ready for a few more good ones. We have a ton of great content today to sift through, including, this team right here on my hat, heading to Miami. Heading to Miami.
I know. I think it's going to be an exciting Super Bowl. So finally, right, the Patriots are not in it this year, and we finally get to see some new teams. And so I'm excited, and it feels, very exciting for these franchises, for 49ers sort of turn that corner, right, after the Colin Kaepernick era. And then the Chiefs, right, it's exciting for them to be back in the playoffs finally after so many years.
I feel as though the Patriots can live vicariously through Jimmy G, though, just like his essence, his aura just illuminating off of him. Bill Belichick's probably just clutching his pearls right now at the thought that he's in the Super Bowl. Or maybe he's not. Maybe he's okay with this because it's just like a big FU to Robert Kraft who made him trade him away.
Yeah, if you look at it, right, that's the thing. And you can argue that part of the reason why they didn't make it to the Super Bowl this year, and there was probably a lot of issues going on with that team. The defense didn't necessarily perform their part in that Titans game. They let Derrick Henry run all over them. But still, part of the reason why they aren't in the Super Bowl this year, you could argue that it was Tom Brady's poor performance compared to his past years. And that's not to take away from Tom Brady being the greatest quarterback of all time. But this year, he was not the best quarterback.
It's not even about necessarily even this year. It's more so Bill's thought process for the next 10 years with Jimmy G. In his first full year as a starter, this team's in the Super Bowl, despite him only having to throw 8 times in the game. 8 times. I couldn't believe that when I read that, but then you pull up Raheem Mostert's box score, and it's God bless. 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. There was a couple touchdown runs where he was literally untouched. You talk about making those cheeseheads into Swiss cheese, literally just carving them up all day long. I said it. I felt as though the Niners were going to win because they were the better team, but I was not expecting them to legitimately crush this team again, blow them out for the second time this year. I thought it was going to be at least a little bit more competitive when you're talking about a Hall of Fame quarterback being on the other side. You thought that they would come in motivated with a little bit more enthusiasm, but no. They were down 27-0 at halftime.
Yeah, and I've said it before, but it's always hard to beat a team 2 times in the same season. Even if it's a team that you're much better than, there's just weird things that happen the second time around. It's a lot easier to game plan for a team that beat you than it is to game plan for a team that you already beat, right? Because if you already beat them, it's hey, what adjustments do we really need to make? I don't know. We sort of already beat them, right? And so the other team sort of has all of the advantage of, hey, let's look at film. Let's see what they got us on, right? Let's see where they were much better than us and see if we can make those adjustments so that we can, counteract them. But man, the 49ers just laid it on Green Bay. And I honestly thought that the game wasn't as close as the final score was.
You mentioned that because there was garbage time points in there. It very easily, let's say the Niners just kept going, kept grinding, kept coming back with the same ferocity. You could have seen them put up 50 on this team. They could have laid a 30-point cover. It didn't really even matter. You talk about fighting when a fighter doesn't match up great stylistically. The Packers just are not a good matchup for this Niners team. There's nothing that Aaron Rodgers could do to prepare himself for that pass rush now that everyone's healthy on the defensive side of the ball. And he was pressured all day through a couple of bad interceptions, including one to end the game to Richard Sherman. And then add on to that, he has that fumble, that horrible fumble that people are looking at him weird because he just made no attempt to jump on it. I understand there's the thought process, oh, well, he's older. He's suffered a couple broken collarbones. You get hurt. But on the other hand, this is a trip to the Super Bowl that's on the line. If there's a moment to ball up and try and jump on that ball, save your ass, that probably would have been it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, right? Is because it comes down to what is the heart of your players? What is the heart of your team? Do they have what it takes to make those tough plays, even if it means sacrificing their body to get them a trip to the Super Bowl? And I think if you asked all of the quarterbacks in this league, would you jump on that ball if it meant that you get a trip to the Super Bowl? Absolutely. I think every single quarterback would have done it. So then it almost makes you question Aaron Rodgers a little bit more. Is his heart and is his soul still into playing? Or does he just want to collect a paycheck, right? And be known as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to only get 1 ring?
Well, that was one of the big question marks when he signed his extension a couple years back that made him the highest at the time, because this is just the way it goes. At the time, the highest paid quarterback in the league. It's yes, you complain about not having enough pieces around you, but you're also signing this big deal when you have more than enough money that prevents the team from adding more pieces around you. there was some interesting comments that Aaron Rodgers made in post-game. He mentioned he thought this was more of a start to something great, a build towards something grander, which is something you wouldn't expect because Aaron Rodgers is starting to come towards that stretch run of his career. I think he's tailed off even more than we talked about Brady at 41. I think Brady at 41, 42, 43 looks a lot better than Aaron Rodgers does now.
Oh, yeah. And I definitely think that Aaron Rodgers, you've seen the regression this year. Like, he just only had those 2 or 3 good games where you're like, oh, yeah, this is the Aaron Rodgers that we know. And the rest of the year, he just did not look very good. And if you had him on your fantasy team like I did, right, you're very underwhelmed and disappointed with his performance. And, you know, there's not a whole lot of people that I would say like, oh, yeah, you should play that person over Aaron Rodgers. But honestly, if you played Jameis Winston over Aaron Rodgers, like, you had a better season in your fantasy. And I would almost argue that I'd be willing to take Jameis Winston, who makes poor decisions sometimes and turns the ball over, but at least he's got that fire and he's got that spark still.
Well, I don't think anyone questions that in terms of fantasy football, but in terms of just the real life game, when I watch Aaron Rodgers, he does not seem like that same guy. He doesn't put that like fear of God in like the opposing team that he used to. There was always that like tentative thought process that, man, Aaron Rodgers, he has 30 seconds left. Hail Mary, here we come. But now, if I apply moderate pressure to him, he's going to want to throw the ball away rather than chancing it downfield, or he's only going to target Davante Adams. And hey, Davante Adams is a great receiver to target, but back in his heyday, Aaron Rodgers was spreading the ball around to like 7 different guys. A lot of people had targets. Coming back to the fantasy thing, it was harder to pick like wide receivers off the Packers because who was going to have the good week? Was it going to be Jordy Nelson? Was it going to be Greg Jennings? Donald Driver, you know, all those guys. But now it's like, well, it's going to be Davante. And whatever you think of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Equanimeous St. Brown, Geronimo Allison, Lazard, I mean, they're not great pieces, but Aaron Rodgers in his prime used to be able to elevate players like that. Used to be able to make wide receivers like a Lazard into top tier level performers, 1,000-yard performers, double-digit touchdowns. I don't think James Jones was necessarily one of the best route runners in the game or an elite wide receiver talent, but with Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball, he was consistently putting up double-digit touchdown figures.
It's just disappointing. And like I said, if you didn't see this coming, we sort of predicted it, right? And we had said that, hey, they're a paper tiger. They're probably the worst 13-3 team that we've seen in a while. And there was a lot of pressure being applied to Aaron Rodgers all season long. A lot of people were able to get to him. He was getting sacked left and right. And so now you've got the 49ers with just a big, massive D-line, a good pass rush, right? That they were able just to humiliate the Packers this game.
People are making fun of Jimmy G for only having to throw the 8 passes. But, I mean, if you're Kyle Shanahan, you're like, why should I have to throw the ball around when we're just running it down this team's throat? He said as much in his post-game press conference. Well, the run was working, so I'm not going to stop now. And I think he could carry that strategy legitimately into the Super Bowl because the Chiefs have the 26th ranked run defense in the game. And you look at guys like Mostert, who Mostert, by the way, cut by 6 different teams in his NFL career prior to landing with the Niners. Here's a lesson to you kids. If you're a young upstart running back in the game and the Shanahans give you a call, pick up that phone, tell your agent to sign it immediately because they have been able to make stars at that running back position consistently for decades. And now you talk about it with Raheem Mostert. You talk about with Matt Breida, Tevin Coleman. They're just pulling smoke and mirrors to make that running back depth to like work out for them. And then they'll even throw in Deebo Samuel on a reverse, and he looks like a running back in transit. Or watch out for George Kittle coming in with those big blocks. George Kittle, I love that guy.
Oh, I know. Yeah, he's a fantastic option to have, right? And it's very difficult to find those really good, talented tight ends, but you guys have one of them on your team.
Yeah, I mean, he only had 1 catch in the game, but you can feel George Kittle's impact just with what he's doing in the run blocking, pass blocking, just being out there on the field, being a positive energy. Like, I feel like he's one of those talents that makes his teammates around him play harder, similar to, again, Garoppolo, because I do think that people are making this claim like, oh, they could have just like threw in Nick Mullins or CJ Beathard. Well, guys, let's realize that in his starting career, Jimmy G is 23-5. Without Jimmy G on the field, the Niners have won a grand total of 5 games in the last 2 years. So just perspective on what a star quarterback can do for a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we sort of talked about this last week, the game manager, right, versus the game dictator. And Jimmy G is definitely a step above game manager, right? Like There's times where he just does enough that he has just what he has to do to win the game, right? And allows his defense to hold him through. But if you need to rely on Jimmy G, he's proven that, hey, I can be that guy and I can do what we have to do to get us the win.
If you're taking out any prop bets on Super Bowl Sunday, I would not be scared to throw out a Jimmy G 300-yard performance. I think it might be a sneaky Super Bowl MVP pick if you're just thinking about making some bets aside from the game score itself.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? I could talk about Niners all day. We'll talk about them more next week. We have 2 weeks to prepare for the Super Bowl. Let's talk about their opponent, because I have been high on the Chiefs all year. As you recall, even go back to the preseason, I had them 14-2. You and Aris were looking at me like, what? You have this team 14-2? What about the Patriots or the Browns are going to be something? It's like, no, guys, I think this guy named Patrick Mahomes is a elite all-star talent, and that this Chiefs team, when everyone's healthy, everyone's playing, is going to be in that top tier of the NFL. In fact, when I was ranking them consistently at the start of the season as my number one overall team, again, was getting pushback. Like, what about this Patriots team with the number one defense? It's like, no, again, this is a star-driven league, star-driven at the quarterback position, and there's no debate about it anymore. Patrick Mahomes is the most valuable talent to any NFL team. No disrespect to Lamar Jackson. He's a great performer, and he deserves the MVP this year. But I think when we talk about Patrick Mahomes for the next decade, he's not going to win a lot of MVPs because people are just going to expect it of him in the same way we always talk about how there's tier one of the Patriots for last decade and everyone else. It's going to be literally Patrick Mahomes and everyone else with the way this guy plays.
Yeah, and what I like about Patrick Mahomes is he's been able to be consistent or to pull himself out of ruts, even in the playoffs, right? And Lamar Jackson was all the rage this year, and everybody's like, oh, look at, Lamar Jackson's starting to evolve. He can throw in the pocket, right? He can step out of the pocket and go run around, right? Uses athleticism. He had basically just as much rushing yards as some of the top running backs in the league, as well as good passing yardage. But then at the end of the day, Lamar Jackson has continued to choke when it comes to the playoffs. And now, though, right, you've got Patrick Mahomes, who, has been able to perform at this super high level throughout not only just the regular season, but the postseason as well. And he just continues to do so. And we've even talked about, like, hey, sometimes you have that regression sort of in your sophomore season and you take a step back. And I haven't really seen that big of a step back from him. There was those few games where he got injured and he was maybe a little bit off of his game. But even then, he was able to bounce back fairly quickly within a few weeks and was able to keep this team going.
Well, here's the difference between Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. Patrick Mahomes looks to pass first, and if nothing's there, he'll use his legs, his athleticism to get out and run like he did this past Sunday for a 30-yard rushing touchdown. Lamar Jackson, he's going to look first to run. If nothing's there, then he'll try and throw a dink-a-dunk pass over the top and catch a safety like coming up forward into the box. So I think that's the separation of him. And kudos to Lamar for what he's been able to do as evolve as a passer. But the point is Patrick Mahomes has everything right now. He's a great athlete. His arm talent is amazing. He just flicks the ball and it goes 80 yards downfield. There is literally any place on the field where this team can score. Doesn't matter if they're in your territory, their territory. When you have pieces like Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Mecole Hardman, Sammy Watkins is one of the slowest pieces on this team, and Sammy Watkins was a first-round pick just a few years back. Just think about that offensive weaponry that's around this guy. And I don't think it's just the weapons around him. I think Patrick Mahomes is legit elevating these players and utilizing their talents best because he also has a mad genius as his head coach in good old Andy Reid. And I know Andy Reid's legacy is definitely going to come into question because he has this reputation as a postseason joker. And we've seen this team now trailing in 2 straight games. We'll see if they can kind of keep that formula up coming against another tough Niners team, probably the best team that they've had to play in this year's postseason. It's going to be a good game. I think it's worrisome that they did trail in those games. What do you kind of think on that?
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing, is that it worries me a little bit to see that they are falling behind in games, right? So they were down by 10 points, I believe was the most they're down by, but they were down by 10 points against the Titans, who have a fairly decent defense. I still think the 49ers defense is better than the Titans defense, though. They were down against Houston, right? And those games were at home. Now you're sort of on a neutral field, right? And so you've got to play a better defense that if you fall behind like they did against the Texans, right, you're down by 20-something points. Can you come back against a defense like the San Francisco 49ers where they have, like I said, that huge defensive line. They've got a good pass rush, right? Like, their corners aren't bad either. And so you've got just this really stout defense that if you fall behind by that much, as good as Pat Mahomes is and as good as able as he's been able to, get past the defense of the Titans, of the Texans, the 49ers are almost in another league of defense. And I just don't think that the 49ers would allow Patrick Mahomes to come back on them if they're down by, 10 plus points.
That's the thing. If you fall behind double digits or 2 scores to the Niners, then you're basically telling Nick Bosa, you're telling DeForest Buckner, you're telling Dee Ford, who was coincidentally a Chief. That's going to be a fun storyline going into the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and feast. Rush the quarterback. Get at him. Make him uncomfortable. Get in his face, because when a team's down 2 scores, obviously they're going to do one thing, throw the ball. It's open season for you if you're a pass rusher. Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting to see Andy Reid's game plan, because they're not known as a rushing team. They did use Damian Williams a little bit more in this past game, but their running game has kind of been all over the place throughout the course of the year. As you recall, they've rotated LaShawn McCoy, Damian Williams, Darnell Williams, probably another Williams with a D as his first name. They have this consistent rotation, whereas, yes, you can say the Niners have had that rotation as well, but everyone that the Niners have plugged in has been able to have consistent success. This is definitely a throw-first team, and you can argue that probably the weakest part of the Niners defense is going to be their secondary, because really behind Richard Sherman, who's going to only command one side of the field, Emmanuel Moseley has been a great story, a talented, undrafted piece that's part of this defense, but he's not good enough to keep up with some of these wide receivers that the Chiefs have.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is the athleticism, right, of the wide receivers that the Chiefs have. That does allow them to get back into the games a little bit easier, right, than some of these other teams. You have this great quarterback, and you got some really athletic skills players. But if they fall behind, like you said, by more than double digits, that's going to be a rough game for the Chiefs, I think.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even recommend necessarily sliding safety help towards Mosley's side, because as much as I love Richard Sherman, and we could talk about a little bit about how Darrelle Revis kind of had that shot at him this week that he's not a man-to-man corner, but he can be beat over the top. He's not exactly a spry young man anymore. And when you talk about a guy who in full sprint like a Tyreek Hill, you can beat him over the top. So you should have Jaquiski Tartt or Jimmy Ward shadowing that side of the field. I think what's going to be a big difference is because the Titans, you talk about, like, they have a good defense, but they were also only rushing 3, which is a bit of a weird strategy when you're playing a team like the Chiefs. You want to definitely put pressure on the quarterback. The Niners are going to rush 4, and they can get home with just 4. So that's going to be a big storyline of this game. I'm also looking forward from it from a point. 2018 season got ruined because Jimmy G got hurt. Where did he get hurt? In Kansas City in week 3. Storyline.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of good storylines, right? Like you said, players moving from team to team, Jimmy G getting hurt. And then also it's almost like a big contrast in styles, right? It's almost that immovable object versus the unstoppable force, right? Whereas the Chiefs offense has sort of been seen as that unstoppable force in the league, right? Of that, like we said, they could come back from even being down 20 plus points against the Texans. They could come back from being down 10 points against the Titans. So you have this unstoppable force. But then the 49ers, all year long, their defense has been that immovable object where they will hold you to whatever score that they need to hold you to just so that they can get enough points to win. And so seeing that clash of styles, I think, makes for another great storyline. I think it's going to be an exciting Super Bowl overall.
I think an X factor, though, when you mention that, is the Niners also have a top 5 offense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
In addition to having that top 5 defense. So I think that's going to be the X factor. We'll see. I mean, obviously, I'm excited about it. You don't have to convince me. I already put in that time off request. There is no way that I am not going to be sitting in front of a television screen on Super Bowl Sunday. I guarantee you that.